stress that people who we interviewed are representative of us, and that's the important thing. We were talking about this in the break a little bit, that we are not talking about the youth of the world, yes, that we are actually talking about a sample of people who are representing the youth, connected, near, close to the youth section, or who could easily access the youth section very, very quickly. And so when we talk about continuing the project, we would love to widen our sample. That's an important thing to say. So hopefully what we talk about today, or now rather, resonates with us in such a way that it could have been one of us saying this, if that makes sense. That would be the idea. Why do you go to sleep? Okay. Findings and observations. So the first part is based on, do you remember the spontaneous discourse, that first half of the interview where we talked and talked almost without interruption or recapitulating on the things that the person said spontaneously? This is what we found there. Thank you, Constanza, for this, because now it's going to make sense. So the first thing that we found was that across interviews, in most interviews, if not all of them, in one way or another, we spoke about 5 themes, which through their interplay and interrelation, we construct our identity. So, this is why Constanza has done this, because...
Yeah, but I forgot the middle one. See now. Sorry.
Oh, but we can more or less.
Yeah.
Not every day you have a Waldorf teacher, mathematician, geometrist. So, this would be more faithful to what we mean than this, but computers are not yet so advanced as to help me with exactly what I want. So the themes that we found that young people spoke about when we asked them to talk about the journey of their lives until now were these: our origins, our profession and our vocation, our education, religion and spirituality, relationships, and in the center of it all, in this dance between areas of life, we stand. Yes? So why is this more faithful than that? Because it's important to understand that it's not like, now I'm going to talk to you about my occupation, now I'm going to talk to you about my education and my family and so on. No. It's that, for example, I start talking about myself and then I decide to tell you where I come from, my family background, but then that leads me to think about my early years in education, which reminds me of my best friend, who actually asked me once a question that set me off on my spiritual path, and then that led me to choose a vocation connected to that, for example. And in all of that, I am constructing myself and defining myself. So I'm using these areas to build to you, Andrea or Johannes or Jana, I'm building a picture of who I am out of talking of these experiences. Does that make sense? Small brackets. No. This is very important. When we started the research, we of course wanted to know about spirituality in youth, the spiritual striving. But it was very important that we didn't go asking for it. We needed to see if it came up in the interviews, if it just spontaneously was spoken about. Because if we are saying that the youth section's work is always based on that which the young person carries within them and is important to them, then we couldn't just bring about, so talk to me about your questions, your beliefs, your ideas, your spiritual practices and so on. It was important for us to leave that space and see if it appeared. And we were delighted to see how quickly and readily it came up. Of course, we are in the Goetheanum, or in the youth section around the world, asking the question. And of course, we have a big sample who are connected to a spiritual movement in itself. So that is a part of it. But as you will see, even in the non-anthroposophical youth, this appears and is an important part. So I just want to say that this was important for us to see. Okay, but what are those areas, actually? So, I feel like I'm giving you the back. Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about origins, this is not a random, like this is, just to give you an idea of how we build this tree or this picture, is actually we take the first part of the interviews, that spontaneous discourse, and we carefully go sentence by sentence marking categories or themes that appear and that repeat themselves, yeah? So actually these areas would be taken out based on the time that people take to speak about them. So of course we talk about other things. We, for example, talk about politics, yeah? But like the relation between how long we talk about politics, for example, and how long we talk about where we grew up, how we were brought up, our family history and ancestry, like even people that I don't know, cultural traits and so on, is minuscule in comparison. That's why we don't make it into a main category of discourse, of spontaneous discourse at least. So having given you the idea, when we talk about vocation and profession, we are talking about our career, our occupation, our, I could say, struggles, matching our job, our finances, and our life tasks. When we talk about our education, we talk about elementary, secondary, and further experiences, but as well self-education, how we see education today, even if it's not our education. And also, often we talk about teachers or role models that made an impact in us, or that made a particular mark in our life. Then we go on to spirituality, and here, of course, anthroposophy is very present amongst those young people who know and are connected to it. Very quickly, we talk about it. It comes very fast. But also religion is spoken about, and there is a clear distinction, and we will see that in a bit, about how we express ourselves in a religious area and how we express ourselves in a spiritual area, not only anthroposophical, but spiritual. Then a lot of young people talk about other themes that we have connected with spirituality, which are, say, meditations, rituals, and the use of psychoactive substances. And we talk about it a bit more. And also philosophies and worldviews. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then the final bow in the spontaneous discourse would be relationships. And I actually would like, as we go into it, to take a bit of time particularly to go over this and that, because they are key areas that are very close to each other and also that are very important. Almost if you could summarize the spontaneous discourse, what is it about? It's about relationships. So that's why we will take a little bit more time to talk about that. So this is kind of the puzzle, if that makes sense, yeah? Don't worry, you don't have to read it all.
Andrea?
Mm-hmm. Well, in case you had forgotten the time. Oh! I don't know what this is. How do I... Yeah. Okay. So maybe we can do a journey. This is the part where I could get lost. Not lost in thought, but lost in time, yeah? Because it's super interesting. So, time. Okay. So, these are not findings per se, but observations. And maybe I can say that one way we could continue this investigation, we were talking about it in the break, would be to begin quantifying some of these observations. So what we talk about now could easily be translated into a survey that gets sent to young people to see whether their own opinions would match those opinions given to us by these 40 young people, actually less, that we have evaluated. So keep that in mind. What this would be observations that we can see in all the discourses that then we can continue deepening, if that makes sense, yeah? So for example, when we talk about origins, what we observed very clearly is that the question of cultural and national identity takes a very special dimension and place for those young people who come from a mixed background, who have different ethnicities or in their own family history or have mixed nationalities. And of course, this is not strange to think about it, but it's important to mention how often young people who hold to passports, perhaps, or who have different ethnic identities in their family take time to tell you, the interviewer, that this is a question that they're working with. Another thing that we observed is that there is a huge interest in understanding the family history. What I mean by that is that a lot of young people take a lot of time to describe to you their mom, their dad, where they came from, where she was born, the family environment, and with a lot of detail, actually, in a lot of cases. And funnily enough, and then there are some interviews where that doesn't happen. It's like, no parents, they didn't come from a family. But then what gets described a lot is the social-cultural background. So my country, my nation, my neighborhood, my city. It's like almost these two are the home. In some places it's the family, it's the direct familial connection, and in others it's this country where I come from, or this nation, or this environment, this social-cultural place. Why do we say that? That sounds obvious to us, maybe. It's because what we can infer from this is that, or think about, is that the question, where am I from, where do I come from, is huge for these young people. It's like, when I ask you to describe me, the journey of your life, you're immediately placing emphasis in this area. And so when we think that what we are doing is trying to understand who is the being talking to me, and I think that I can see them through where they put their focus, where they put their attention, where they put their sight upon, then this is an area that takes special weight. And then, just a word about how we speak about this particular area is that what we can observe is that in many of the discourses, you can see sense, not see, but sense in how we speak about it. The tone of voice, the words we use, the tempo with which we speak about it. It's one of, that I could describe, the words I use is acceptance, integration. This is where I come from. It's almost a matter of fact experience. Even in the interviews that were with people who had very difficult upbringings, people who perhaps had to migrate from their home country because of war, or who had abusive families, even in those cases, the young people speak of their origin in a way that is sensible, serious, careful, but very accepting, I would say. So we are already seeing that it's a group of people who are not combative. Yeah, there is no clash, there is no complaining about something and then struggling against it. There is a general acceptance, but it's not that I want to stay there. It's that I want to transcend it. I take it on board. I accept it, so that I take it further. So that I do something new. You can see that in some quotes that I haven't brought today, but you will be able to read it in the publication, where young people say things like, I feel like I'm from everywhere. I feel like the same person, for example, tells you, I am so interested in finding out my roots, my ancestry, where I come from, but then 10 minutes later she's telling you, I don't know why people place so much importance on this, because we're all the same, and I feel the same everywhere. This is kind of the experience. Okay, I won't go much more into detail here. Then education. We were just having a long conversation about this. So education in the interviews is interesting, because what we observe is that people talk about it, of course. It's a huge part of life. The discourse spends time here. But there are two ways of talking about education. One is the education that I had, that I received, and the other one is how I perceive education today. Yes? And one could say that it doesn't really matter which we are looking at, whether it was mine or how we perceive it. In general, there is a description of it as is something that you have to go through. It's a passage. It's something that you experience, that you have to attend or be a part of, but it's not. Its value is not per se for what you receive in the educational system, but for how it allows me to develop in such a way that then I apply to the other areas. So, for example, I begin talking about my school and what I started doing in primary school, and then suddenly, after 10 seconds of talking to you about the setup, I'm talking to you about my friends, about what my family thought about what I did for homework, about my teachers, about, you see, we're not talking about what I learn at school, but how I form relationships, how I ask myself questions, how I build my identity, how I find my connection to my vocation, how I choose my profession. So in a way, it's kind of like a stage where things happen, but it's not the content per se that we place importance on. There are, of course, there is an exception, and that's when young people have had a very an meaningful experience with a teacher or with a peer at school, then suddenly the attention into education goes boom, focused. Like, there is something so special that I have to sustain the dialogue there, or the discourse. So this is the area where we would see, when we see them, the most meaningful role models, if you wish. Not always do we see them, but when it happens, it happens. And then, yeah, I've said here, you can read it when you're at home, is general acceptance, slight disappointment, or indifference, the way in which we describe education. It's funny because I was expecting to see something different amongst Waldorf students, but it's not the case. I would say that there's only one case where the person really describes Waldorf education as being, her education, because she says, I can't compare it to others because I haven't experienced it, as something particularly good in her life and important in her life. The rest, not so much. So that was a surprise for me. And then just another final note, and this is a difference that we need to deepen on, is it's clear that in Asian youth, or in youth coming from East Asia and Asia, so India, Malaysia, Philippines, and so on, there is a very strong connection between family, education, and profession. So there is a lot of tension or expectation mixed in these three areas. Yes, that normally begins with the family and is carried on throughout the decisions that we make in these areas. And that's something that we have gently observed for now. It would have to be deepened. And it's also seen in other youth from other countries, but it's particularly present in the Asian, in the people coming from Asian countries. Good? Oh. Why is it sleeping, Jessie? Does it resonate so far? That's so good. Imagine that you were saying to me, no, that doesn't make any sense. I think it's youth section. I'm trying to highlight the fact that I'm sometimes surprised in what I see, just so that you see that it's not something I'm searching for, because I think it's often that I talk to people about what I find, and then they say to me, but really, is it like that, or you just want to see it like this? And I'm like, look, take the interviews and you read them, and then you can probably arrive to some conclusions. But just, yeah, it's important to highlight that many times I was going expecting to find something that wasn't there, and that I had to, and sometimes I could see myself really trying to find it, like, no, but surely there is difference in the Waldorfs. No, it's not the case. Okay. I also won't go into vocation and profession, also because a lot has been done in this area, I think. There are so many studies that talk about, like, we could go into this in the afternoon, millennials, the relationship to profession, post-millennials, the relationship to whatever. So I won't take so much time now to go into this, but what would be important to say about vocation and profession, and why we have mixed them and put them in one category together, is that this area represents the great challenge of our young people. What do I mean by that? There is a clear tension, or the description of a tension, between what I know I want to do in my life and what I wish to bring to the world once I have answered that, and marrying that to my occupation. My occupation would be that in which I spend most of my time of life in order to get the resources that sustain me at a physical level, that gives me a roof over my head and that gives me sustenance to live in peace and with dignity. There is a real sense of struggle here, and of course, when it comes together, something magical happens, which is this kind of sense of achievement, or really having been on the right track in a way. And sometimes it lasts for a long time, and sometimes it's only momentaneously, and then you fall back into it. So there is this whole struggle and trying to, this is the area, I would say, where there is most conflict for us. But then other things which are general is that when we talk about profession, vocation, mission in life, life task, there are three ways, or three, it derives in three conclusions. No? There are three things which are clear. One is that there is no tolerance to work situation or job situations. I say no tolerance, of course, we're talking about youth who have the means to choose, yeah? They are in a situation where they can really access choice, they can choose to do things, they're privileged in that sense. But I question whether even if you didn't have the means to choose, you wouldn't feel the same, This is where we're at. We're in how we feel about work. And it's that work shouldn't be a place, or I cannot be engaged in a work where there is a conflict between their ethics and mine. I leave. Eventually I can stay there for a while, but eventually there is no, I need to move on. And even if that means working in an area of my of professional life that doesn't match what I want, I prefer that than to be in a place where there's no ethical coherence between my values and the workplace. The other thing is that the workplace, if it doesn't facilitate a creation of meaningful relationships, I end up disinterested. Yes, sure, I will turn up to work, but I feel depressed. It impacts the other areas of my life. I don't want to be there. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like I'm successful, and I don't feel like I want to continue there. So it's a very important aspect. And then, this is so millennial. This is like so many people have said this before. I'm sorry, but I'm going to repeat it. If I cannot change something in that place where I am, then I'm also not interested in staying. This is my life task, this is the meaning that I bring to the world, this is the area in which I can do that, and if you don't allow me to do something like that, then I lose interest, and I'm going to start looking for other outlets. Okay. And then, of course, work should be you will see this later, but if my workplace or my profession or my vocation doesn't allow me to learn, to develop myself, to continue exploring the questions we will see later that are important to me, then it's likely that, again, I will lose interest or move or try and change it. So, on top of that, the second point would be that we're all going to agree with this because we've experienced it, I'm sure. Profession and vocation is a marriage of disciplines for us. So, you have the mathematician who's the student of mathematics who is babysitting, who used to be working in the baker shop a year ago, who next year is developing a website, and then you know, I'm an actress, but I'm going to use my example, I'm an actress, but now I'm doing social research. So this is the common thing. It's no longer I choose a path and it's so linear and clear that it goes like a smooth thread. It's a branch, it's trees that, and everything makes sense, but it makes sense because of how we do it, not because of what we do. And that's the third point, that once those young people who have really deepened their sense of vocation, that which moves them, that would be the difference between profession and vocation, would be that vocation is that which activates my passion for bringing something to the world, it's what I am here to do, and profession is the form, the shape in which I choose to do that. Yes? So once vocation has been understood so clearly, it doesn't matter so much what I'm doing professionally. It doesn't matter if I'm a waitress, or if I'm a businessman, or if I am an artist, because I'm bringing that into everything I do. Yes? And so I would I would search in these ways, like what leads a person to really connect with vocation and have it so clear that then they have a sense of freedom across professional life, and others don't. Others are searching and really, this would be an interesting thing. Okay. How are we doing? Make sense? Oops. Okay. So spirituality, we talked about religion, and very quickly, it's a critical area. It's an area where, religion has mainly done mistakes in the history of life. It's not very interesting. I don't find answers there, but their figures are interesting. Christ, Buddha, Krishna, they interest me. They are interesting figures. And that often leads me to the search for more content on those figures, which sometimes leads to spirituality or spiritual searching, spiritual practice. Yeah, here we're not talking about spiritual striving necessarily, but spirituality made practice, I guess, or being in our daily lives, if that makes sense. So, what is the difference between religion and spirituality would be that, whereas in religion, say in Catholicism, I am Baptist, I do the communion, I don't find answers to my questions. In spirituality, I don't find answers, but I find interesting ways of exploring them. So I feel that it's somewhere leading somewhere more interesting. And what do I search for is this question of meaning, finding meaning, where do things make sense, how can I really find answers to the big riddles of life, and so on. And that's why spirituality appears so often. And then, just a note about this, because I think we will write a lot more about it. The use of psychoactive substances occurs in two ways. One is recreational, and one is, I describe it as a door. Often it's the door that then leads into a spiritual further striving, yeah? So actually, often it's replaced by, say, anthroposophy or meditation or a different way of exploring that area. But it happens. It's actually quite common. A lot of the interviewees had that experience, or I think only one was still engaged in the use of substances. And then when it's recreational, in most of the interviewees that spoke about it, it was something that they had left behind because it no longer matched their current striving or doing. Yeah. So let's go a little bit deeper into spirituality because it's interesting. Maybe here it would be important that you take the paper, if you can. I don't have enough time to read everything, but maybe it gives you an idea to have it visually. What we did, just to show what we mean by spirituality appears in the discourse, what I did is to take 3 quotes from 3 young people who have different links to anthroposophy, because that's our main variable where we can discern. And there are 3 forms. There are 3 forms of expressing the theme of spirituality, and we've called them transcending self, a search for transcending self, awakening to questions, and finding meaning and sense. This would be how we talk about spirituality in our study. And then, of course, when the publication comes, we have, after we did the interviews and we looked at them, we have completed it with some theories and some ideas about what spirituality is that are currently being talked about in the academic field. So, but just to give you an idea, is these pillars: transcending self, awakening to questions, and then finding meaning and sense, or going searching for it. And maybe we don't need to read all of them, but maybe I can read the transcending self, because I think it's really interesting that it comes from someone who a priori is not linked to any religious or spiritual activity per se. Okay, so this person said, my question was, what heals you? Because she said before that she had gone through an experience of hurting, yeah? So my question was, what heals you? Not about spirituality. And this person said, I don't know what heals me. The fact that I'm alive, that I'm committed to surviving or something. I don't think there's anything that heals you specifically. For me, I really need the edge, trees, the sea, because I need, if you're looking for a miracle or you're looking for God or whatever, you don't need to look very far. It's everywhere. To look at the things living and being, moving, and not really being understood, and managing to survive again and again and again. However difficult, life manages to survive. That's very helpful to me, because I'm like, you can give yourself some credit because you're still here. And then, what are you going to do with it? In the Awakening to Questions, we have someone, and here you have so many different expressions of it in the interviews, of suddenly, one day, out of nowhere, normally in adolescence or late adolescence, all these questions just appeared, and who am I, and why am I here, and what is this, and what, but why should I, and when, and how, and often this experience is it makes an impact in one's life, and it stays with you. And it's a question whether you continue asking or not. But we don't need, do you want me to read it? It's nice to hear them, no? Okay. Well, okay. I had an experience that I called awakening. My consciousness changed. I felt that I was awake in the world. I really understood now that it was the moment when maybe for the first time I see people, walls, cars, streets. Not like pictures. It was so full of life. And I had such a lot of questions in this moment, like, who am I? What does it mean to be human? Why does this happen to me? I had a simple, normal life with simple, normal dreams of having a good career, a car, a husband, I don't know, just to live my life. And something happened with me. I was awake and I had a lot of questions without answers. And I started to look for my spiritual way because I felt alone. I was really nervous because I didn't understand what happened to me, why I have these questions, and why people around me don't ask these questions. How is that possible? Okay. And the third example, finding meaning and sense, was someone who was from an anthroposophical background, and very early in her interview she went straight into this theme. And so for me it was clear that the question for her was, what is anthroposophy and what is spirituality for you? Because she spoke about it constantly, so I needed to understand what she meant by it. So in this case, this is a direct question. What is a spiritual moment for you? And she said, some spiritual experience can be like my whole being saying yes to something. Yes, a feeling that something is good and going in the right direction. And it can also be to do with mysteries being revealed, which can come slowly and sometimes in unexpected moments. Sometimes it can be something you've heard about, something you've read about, something in a lecture, something to do with your biography, and things have started to come together. It can also be to do with numbers and things like that. It's like a puzzle starts coming together. Things start to make sense. And it's like, oh yes, nothing is completely random. these mysteries that are spoken about are real. I won't go into the anthroposophy because you can read it at home, but there are 3 different experiences of deepening this subject. So we've looked at spirituality in general, how it comes up in the discourse, and then we see how anthroposophy comes, and there are 3 clear moments. One is when I meet anthroposophy, and here is so wonderful. Like, I sum it up like this. Finally, oh yes, thank God, I feel home. This makes sense. That, honestly, the amount of times that people say that is really amazing. And I would say that going a step further after this meeting, what the value found in anthroposophy really tends to be the integrational aspect. This is not the right word. It's how much I'm able to explore through it. It's not a closed field. It's a place in which I step into, and then many subjects take a life of its own that I become interested in. So whereas, yeah, this is the important thing. It's a door to many other doors. It's like a room through which I can enter more places, no? And then an experience of, this happens often amongst young people who are brought up in an anthroposophical way, that, you know, they go through this experience of just living in an anthroposophical environment, but they never question what that is, until one day suddenly the question appears, and then it's like, what is anthroposophy? Or why is my school the way in which it is? Or, and so on, and they often go into finding the answer. And that's when normally they search for an individual, you know, someone who represents to them anthroposophy, a teacher, a parent, or someone who a friend introduces them to, and so on. And it's often through an individual that the door opens for them. Or the individual, which is Steiner, of course, finding a book. Yeah. And then I wanted to add this final one, the knowledge through experience, because I think this is very interesting. It doesn't appear very often. But this young person who had an experience of anthroposophy, and after a while, he felt that he had to leave, that he had to continue in a different way. And he says that it's not that he was ever disappointed or that he didn't find the right impulse for him. It's just that he needed to complete it, to bring it to life, to put it into practice in other realms. And I think it's such an important thing to bring, that for them it's not enough to consume something, but actually to put it into practice and to bring it to life through experience. And you can read it later, it's very descriptive, I think. So much, no? Oof. Are you very hungry? This I already spoke about. I think for me, personally, this would be something to really deepen into. So, yeah?
To understand the process, the test in the city dogs, it was in the phase of recapitulation, isn't it?
It depends, actually. So, I can tell you when most of them happen. So, for example, in the transcending self, it would be recapitulation. Awakening to questions, it was also recapitulation. Yeah, actually, the 3 of them are. Yeah. Meeting anthroposophy, asking for anthroposophy, they were both in the introduction. They came, I think. I can search for this. But yeah, we're always talking now, we're in the phase of spontaneous discourse. So this is something that happens always in that first half of the interview. Yeah. We're not in the questions yet of the research. So I think it would be interesting to look at, Nico, you can come in and...
Okay.
Yeah? Okay. It's interesting to deepen here. Like, we could easily do a study on how spirituality has evolved through the 20th century and now. What is spirituality to young people? How is it used in a daily life, and how does it impact action? I think is something to go into, but we can talk about that later. Now, we have 15 minutes before lunch, and I have a lot to talk about.
I don't mind eating a bit later.
Or we can do 15 minutes, we break, and then I continue after the break. Yeah?
So take your time. I mean, there's no rush.
Yeah, because look at this. Yeah, you don't have to read it, don't worry, it's summarized. I put them up because I knew I was giving them to you, and I think it's nice to take them home with you so that you can then read them, but it's not for reading now. Relationships. Okay, I am going to read because it makes sense. What I wrote was that basically that's what it's all at. I mean, if we spend time talking about things, it's about relationships. Like, and it's important. It's not only the relationships to my friends, my family, others, it's the relationship to myself. You know, this takes a huge element, and so relationships is a big theme in this research because it's like what interweaves almost everything. It's where identity is most clearly kind of being defined. And I just read it because I think they say it better than I ever will. I have come to find out that that's all life is. Like, who the heck cares about what you're doing, where you're living, or whatever? It's all about the connections and relationships that you're building with people. At the end of a spontaneous discourse without interruption for 1 hour. So, I summarized it for you so that you don't have to do it yourself. It's the people in my life who have been the most important. I think for some people are the events, or some people are the accidents, some people it's terrible events, and some people it's moving. But for me it was the people. Because if I go through my life, when you delete one person from my history, I could have changed the way I am here. So that's me until now. And then I am my social relationships, the people with whom I am. That is to say, I don't know who I am, nor do I have a notion of myself as someone who is determined in such a way that there is a thing, something external to me, and that I am something internal. I am who I am, depending on who I am with. That is to say that I am only inasmuch as I am with another. I am not in the other. If I am not in the other, I don't know with the other, I think. I don't know who I am. I am an abstraction or a sum of qualities that could be different. Maybe I would be that. Just so that you know that I don't search for these things, that they are saved. And again, so for me, my experience of the world is the people who I get to meet. It's like, it is it. So that's why we said that's what it's all at. And then there are examples of how the consciousness that there is on how I relate to myself directly impacts how I relate to another. This is like, for us, I think the way I would summarize it is that our generation, this group of people, this particular youth, are hyper-conscious of how important the encounter is in who I am and what I do in the world. That's how we would summarize it. And it's funny, no? Because what this girl says, maybe for some people are the events, maybe for some people are the accidents. No, actually, all of them are telling the same as you are saying, that it is the people. So this is something, again, found across, and it's something natural. It's not something which has been worked on, I think. And that's something that I think we carry as a generation, and maybe we need to think a bit more about how we use it, where it's leading us to, in a way. The other point, which I think is very important, and it appears in many, is that relationship is the future. So we will see this when we go into the gifts for the future. Like, this is what I see is happening, that is new in new generations. I see it's happening, it's coming, this wanting togetherness, this wanting community, and also that's the future I hope for. So, yeah. And then something very beautiful and difficult to read sometimes as well is this: there is so much integration in our people, like there is so much taking on difference, yes. But I can be inclusive of difference so long as this doesn't take me away from my striving, you know? Where there is a relationship that just, it's not that it doesn't support me, it's not. If I have to leave myself completely. To be with somebody, it's likely that the relationship will be let go of. So here you can see the realm of suddenly I have a group of friends, and then it changes completely because my questions are different. Or I was in a relationship for a long time that actually, if I was honest with myself and what I wanted for the future, I couldn't do it with them, so I had to let them go. And this is an experience that makes, I think, relationships really dynamic, but also because it's a paradox, because I know how important relationships are, that I give them so much the rightful place that often I have to say no to them. I think it's important to highlight. Oh, that's good. So let's finish with this next page. And it's already been spoken about a little bit. But it's this notion that what is the same for every human being is that we are all different. And this appears in many interviews. And I was so glad, because I think this is actually the theme of the research, Like, how can you get as many young people as diverse as possible to try and find that which is common to them? Actually, what's common to them is their humanity, which unfolds in these areas with these questions in this manner. But in the words of this interviewee, the first one, maybe I can just read the last part. And they say, the only thing I believe is that we are all different, and actually, hopefully as someone existing in an era that we are more aware of and fighting for more tolerance of difference, and that doesn't mean that you're different and we have to find a way of the commonality so that we can be the same. We can just be different in the same space. It's a bit difficult to read this one, but we understand it, yeah? I am interested in building my relationships, connecting with people, based on common human things. Humans, I mean. I always try to find, and it's not too hard, to find something that everybody has the same. Everybody is the same in some way, and whatever weirdo I meet, whatever freak the guy is, their nature is the same. If people are in conflict, it means they are not in harmony with themselves. So I try to always build relationships based on common things, and if someone wants to hurt me or make conflict with me, I speak specifically to this higher I. Or I try to even do this if he doesn't do the same thing. Sorry, that's my mistakes in the typos. And finally, this is the other aspect, is we unite in the spiritual. We unite in that higher space where our opinions and differences have been left behind and we enter real common ground. And this person says, for me, it's a question about spiritual community, because this is where we can meet each other. Because if we speak to each other about feelings, we are always different in our feelings. We are individual persons. But for example, how do we understand each other now, when we are from a different country, different mentality, education, all our backgrounds are so different, but we understand each other? How did this happen? Where do we meet each other? For me, it's in a spiritual level. The Russians. Okay. So, just to summarize, our identity, or we speak about ourselves and our identity by taking ourselves through a journey of all these areas that constitute our life, where we have been to and we have experienced and we've acquired skills and knowledge about ourselves. And very important, I didn't say, that what we saw, I was talking to Constance about this, it's so funny that when we are speaking about ourselves, we are doing this dance amongst between extremes, When I was really successful, and then when I had nothing. And then when I was at the peak of my ideas and everything, and then when I was totally uninspired, or when I felt extreme pain, and suddenly extreme joy. It's always in this. And Constanza, you said that this is something that really belongs to youth. I didn't know that, but for me it was really lovely to see it, how it's okay, that we go in these extremes, that it happens, And it's in this pause that we experience ourselves the most, I think. And when we come back, we talk about a very exciting thing, which for us as anthroposophical youth doesn't seem so strange, but that I was very happy to find, is conscious becoming, and also some other things that are beautiful. Yeah? Great, thank you.